Thank you for joining Wars of the Rosies as we begin with part 1, The Path of Faith. From How to Understand Your Bible Part 2, The Mystical Christ. Head of Christ by Toussaint Durel, 1561 through 1602, École Française. The Mystical Christ, Religion as a Personal Religious Experience by Manly P. Hall, 2nd edition. The Labyrinth of Constantine. Chapter 1, The Path of Faith. Mysticism is not a sect or a creed. It is a conviction, deriving its authority from the natural instincts of the human heart. The desire to know intensifies the rational faculties of the mind and the intuitive powers of the soul. The intellect approaches knowledge from the outside. It stands as an observer of the wonders of the universe, but it cannot experience what it discovers. The emotions do not exist or fulfill themselves on the impersonal level of rational procedure. They always desire to possess or to be possessed. It is the way of the heart and soul knowledge, to bring dead things to life, and to bestow its own warmth and light upon the aloofness of wisdom. Thus, as science seeks truth by impersonalizing that which is personal, religion achieves the satisfaction of itself by personalizing that which is impersonal. To the mind, the story of religion is a historical account of man's spiritual, ethical, and moral descent. The spiritual experience of the race is of interest to the anthropologist, concern to the sociologist, and anxiety to the psychologist. Such worries and reservations are of no interest to the devout. The heart accepts only the essential fact of faith. It rejects neither the old nor the new, for its very reaction is timeless. The faith of the living is always the living faith. It is vital because it is immediately available. The instinct to believe is identical with the instinct to survive. To the skeptic, religion may be a constant cause of doubt, but to the believer, it is an ever-present help. The soul of religion, like the soul of man, is locked within a material structure and subject to those misfortunes and disasters which corrupt and destroy forms. When we meet another human being, we are not satisfied to know him only according to his outward appearance. We wish to understand him and to experience a degree of intimacy by which there is a mutual sharing of things intangible and at the same time invaluable. We wish to know the person that lives in the body, and in like manner we desire to know and not merely observed or examined. The forms of religion are vast bodies ensouled by ideals and convictions. It is not enough to accept the forms or even examine the organisms and organizations which bear witness to the inner workings of doctrine. The desire to experience religion reveals itself as a quest for the object of a simple and natural devotion. We desire to believe, we desire to hope, and most of all, we desire to be understood. We seek in our faith the satisfaction of instincts otherwise frustrated. We may be seeking security, but we can never be satisfied until we discover, as a fact within ourselves, the all-sufficiency of the divine power. It is from this urgent need for personal adjustment with faith that the mystical concept grew. By means of mysticism, man bridged, by the simple act of faith, the interval between himself and God. While the mind defined the splendors and powers of deity, the heart interpreted both the divine person and the divine purpose on the level of familiar acceptances. The venerating instinct accepted God through the experience of human parenthood, the benevolent instinct through the experience of human brotherhood, and the final relationship between divinity and humanity through the experience of mortal love. The mental faculties of the human being are ever alert to that kind of evidence, proof or demonstration, which will provide cherished beliefs with reasonable explanations. This procedure is long and difficult and usually leads to conflict and confusion. It requires a wonderfully ordered mind to achieve profundity within complexity. it is not unlikely that discussion will fall into argument, and that the ends which we seek will be obscured by the means which we use to attain them. The intellectualist is seldom comforted, inspired, or enriched as a person by his own thoughts. To him, thinking is a vocation or an avocation, and he can devote his entire life to technical processes and formulas which neither enrich nor improve his character. The heart is not restricted or restrained by the intrinsic machinery of logic. It requires neither science nor philosophy to justify its convictions. Such support or defense as the mind contributes is accepted, but not the determining factor. The mind is ever seeking satisfaction, the heart security. Those who follow the dictates of reason desire to know and to conquer the unknown with the energy of thought. The emotional energies become impatient of this interminable curiosity. They demand no more of fact than is immediately available. It is not necessary to be a botanist in order to appreciate a flower. Its beauty may be the result of the working of strange and mysterious laws, but the flower conveys a message by the simple fact of being. As the botanist becomes ever more deeply absorbed in his studies of plant life, the direct impact of the beauty is sacrificed. Research transforms the natural wonder into a scientific marvel. Eager to learn, he destroys the flower so that he can analyze its structure. In the end, he has sacrificed beauty in the effort to understand the beautiful. As knowledge feeds the mind, so beauty nourishes the heart. The intellect survives upon its uncertainties, the emotions upon their acceptances. In a strange way, thoughts are negative and feelings positive. The mind demands, the heart gives. Learning is a process of accumulation by which we seek to gather all kinds of information for the purpose of enriching the intellect. That which the mind so patiently collects becomes an ornament or adornment of faculties. The heart chooses rather to bestow or to give of itself. It responds instinctively to the invitation of beauty. It yearns ever to be one with the object of its devotion. The religious mystery contains within itself all that is known and all that is unknown about life and living. The individual exists in an immensity of time and space, of consciousness and intellect, of energy and matter. All the diversified achievements of men are in substance spiritual, even though in appearance some of them may seem to be physical. The search for knowledge is motivated by the impulse to understand God and self. Even while the mind is exploring the infinite manifestations of the divine power, the heart is striving to experience this power as an immediate fact. Knowing with the mind depends upon the patient arrangement of fragments into patterns. Knowing with the heart is an immediate appreciation of principles. We may ask if it is possible to process truth without the laborious process of analysis and estimation. Mysticism affirms that truth cannot be possessed even by mind. By virtues peculiar to itself, however, the heart can be possessed by truth. We grow, not by demanding, but by accepting. This gradual transformation of attitudes is beautifully revealed in the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. The king's first songs, "My beloved is mine." Later he broadens his understanding, saying, "My beloved is mine, and I am my beloved's." Then, at the end of the song, he speaks the heart doctrine. "I am my beloved's," the motion from the consciousness of possession to the realization of perfect renunciation is the path of mysticism. The heart tells us that we gain all by giving all. In this way, we know that through the love of God, we experience the God of love. The heart actually becomes that which the mind is forever seeking. Even this miracle in itself cannot be comprehended by the reasoning powers. They can accept it only as a miracle and will reject it utterly if they have been schooled against the possibility of the miraculous. It is difficult to find a word which will describe the perceptive faculties of the soul. Perhaps we can call them appreciative. Faith is first an appreciation of something which cannot be immediately known. We appreciate great music, beautiful works of art, and fine literature. The impulse of approval, together with acceptance, implies that we acknowledge superiority. If we appreciate that which is fine and have the instinctive ability to recognize true worth, we are said to have good taste. Refinement manifests as an instinctive recognition of values. Applied to religion, appreciation enlarges faith because it bestows sublimity upon God and His works. Mysticism teaches the imminent availability of the divine power. It transforms by a process of interpretation all doctrines from codes into qualities of conviction. The religious story is accepted, not historically, but as an eternal fact of consciousness. Christian mysticism derives its authority from the teaching of Jesus and his disciples, and especially from the writings of the Apostle Paul. It is probably that Paul himself had received instruction from the teachers of non-Christian sects. He studied the writings of the Jewish mystical philosopher Hillel and was conversant with the doctrines of the Syrian Gnostics. There has been much controversy about Paul and his place in the descent of the Christian faith. He has always had a considerable following among Christian liberals, many of whom were sympathetic to the mystical interpretation of the Scriptures. Paul alone of those whose writings have been included in the New Testament preached Christ in a mystery. Some accepted Jesus as the Son of God, the promised Messiah, who was to redeem the faithful by his advent and ministry. Others were convinced that he was to become the Redeemer of the Jewish nation and the restorer of the ruling house. Still others, rejecting the divinity of the man, saw in Jesus a noble and virtuous teacher who sacrificed his life in the service of humanity. Paul, after his vision on the road to Tarsus, introduced a new dimension of understanding. He preached, Christ in you, the hope of glory. By this statement alone, he revealed his deeper insight. It does not follow that all of Paul's opinions were equally lofty or applicable to future generations. Yet throughout his writings are gentle and beautiful phrases and passages which reveal a sincere and searching heart. The preaching of Paul divided the Christian faith into two distinct conceptions. One writer has referred to these as the Jesus of Peter and the Christ of Paul. The physical church claims its descent from Peter and has certainly emphasized the literal part of the Christian mystery, the mystical communion, which from its very nature could not be a vast organization, has descended from Paul and has bestowed upon the world those free thinkers and religious liberals who suffered as heretics from the persecution of their more orthodox brethren. Conformity with approved theological institutions does not satisfy all who seek religious inspiration. While many are content to follow in the creeds of their fathers, there are always a few who feel the need for a more personal spiritual experience. The rise of modern science has contributed to the rapid growth of mystical movements throughout the modern world. Many of the beliefs acceptable to our forebears are incompatible with present-day knowledge. In every instance, the contradictions have arisen in the historical parts of the faith. It has become increasingly difficult to sustain the uniqueness of the Christian doctrine or to justify the exceptional place which it occupies in the religious world. Every part of the physical structure has been assailed or questioned. The authenticity of the Gospels themselves and even the historical existence of Jesus have been attacked. The nominal Christian, being in no position to debate these subjects in controversy, has been forced to accept or reject without adequate evidence. Here the mind has taken over the guardianship of spiritual convictions, and the result has been a bitter controversy. While the objects of his faith are being constantly undermined, the religious person still experiences within himself the need for faith. The disturbed state of present human society intensifies the longing for spiritual security. Many are beginning to realize that this security came not from their church, but from within themselves. They bestowed their faith upon the creed or denomination which they accepted. Actually, the consolation which they imagined they had received from theology originated in a devout heart dedicated to truth. Christianity was not an institution, but a conviction, guiding conduct and inspiring to the performance of good works. When a man becomes dissatisfied with the teachings of his sect, he sought a pure stream of instruction. After numerous adventures, a few came to the conclusion that religion was a private matter and not a public concern. When an intellectualist disagreed with his clergy, he became an agnostic, and when an idealist found himself in the same predicament, he became a mystic. The reasoning faculties addicted to the Aristotelian method were neither in or out of the church. The heart, rejecting such dramatic decision, resolved to keep the faith and to allow theologies to rise or fall with time. After all, the church was only the handmaiden of the doctrine. She preached what she believed, but it was the right of the human heart to weigh all things and cling unto the good. The corruptions of the church had no effect upon the integrity of the spiritual content of religion. To reject the substance because a human organization was inadequate was foolish. To so identify the substance and the shadow that both survived or fell together was stubbornness, not devotion. All bodies become infirm and ultimately perish. Truth itself cannot vanish in the dust, but is forever fashioning nobler forms through which to function. It may be that the modern materialistic beliefs that life has no existence apart from the body, and that man has no immortal soul, has contributed to the notion that religion is identical with theological structures, and cannot exist apart from them. The idealist will not accept such a doctrine. He prefers to hold as a sacred fact within himself that man can fail religion, but religion per se never fails man. The mystic by nature is not combative, nor does he seek to discredit the works of his fellow men. He frees himself from the entanglements which have become burdensome by the simple expedient of interpretation. He ensouls the literal with such overtones as are required to fulfill his own convictions. Thus he can attain the same church and listen to the same clergyman without discomfort. He perfects from within his own heart whatever may be deficient in the sermon. Seeking new meanings, he finds them by the very fact that he knows them to exist. Mysticism might have achieved a larger sphere of social influence had it been more militant. But a contrite heart is never militant and fulfills its impulses in gentle ways. Mysticism always increases when prevailing religious institutions are dogmatically narrow or reactionary. When too much emphasis is placed upon formal worship or the unquestioning acceptance of inflexible creeds, the natural instincts of the heart are frustrated and offended. No one can be happy if his faith offends his emotional instincts or outrages his mentality. No oppression can be more complete than a theological tyranny, especially if this reduces the spiritual mystery to the level of a physical despot. The revulsion against mediocrity is really a defense of the integrity of principles. The mystic seeks in himself that which he has failed to find in his creed. The moment the search for reality is turned inward, away from forms and towards life itself, the deeper and more beautiful facts of religion become apparent. It is usual to conclude that mystics are strange kinds of persons, religious misfits who have chosen to depart from conventional paths of devotion into a wilderness of intangible ideals. Nothing can be further from the truth. There have been moments in the lives of the more orthodox when they have temporarily become mystics because of emergencies. Whenever and wherever the immanence of God is urgently required, mysticism emerges as the most vital element in the compound of faith. Private prayer is a mystical ritual. It assumes that God is available to all who ask with real and simple sincerity. The moment an individual takes his religious convictions and applies it as a present source of strength or comfort, he accepts the omnipresence of the divine power. This experience of the acceptance of God and the powers of God is the basic mystical experience. In the human life way, faith usually emerges as reason fails. We put our trust in the sufficiency of material resources as long as these seem to sustain our requirements. Both the sick man and the physician have a common faith in medical knowledge until the disease is pronounced to be fatal. In that moment, skill relinquishes authority, and the future is returned to the keeping of the infinite power. In the presence of sovereign uncertainty, we become aware of our place in an infinite plane. It is now the plan which must carry on. We can go no further. Resignation to the divine will comes at the end of most lives. But at the beginning of mysticism, whether we know it or not, we live forever in the substance of the divine nature. It was always available by the simple act of acceptance. It was a mistake to assume that the devotional attitude is associated with limitation of intellectual powers. We never actually outgrow the need for spiritual consolation. Primitive man was a mystic by instinct, and modern man becomes a mystic by intuition. The intellectual faculties unfold from a state of ignorance to a state of knowledge. The emotional nature unfolds from a condition of instinct to a condition of intuition. The security of personal living is entrusted to the mind only in that transition period between ignorance and wisdom. In the closing years of his life, Plato passed through the mystical experience. His magnificent mind made possible a more complete acceptance of the universal mystery. It was a transformation which so alarmed Aristotle that he finally withdrew from the academy and formed his own school. Aristotle could not follow his master along the narrow path that led from philosophy to faith. The Neoplatonists of Alexandria were, for the most part, men of astounding scholarship, yet the concepts which they unfolded were completely mystical. The mind was disciplined to accept union with the divine nature as the fulfillment of its own purpose. In the cycle of life, the perfect faith of a small child is restored as the perfect faith of the sages. We experience the divine presence as we stand upon thresholds. It is present on the threshold of material life, and it reappears on the threshold which leads from this world to the one beyond. As all religions include mystical content, so other departments of human activity have their spiritual overtones. We know that the theological instinct impels towards the conscious experience of God. The philosophical quest is motivated by the dynamic impulse to seek and discover truth. Even physical science is dominated by the irresistible urge to conquer the unknown and to approach the substance of reality. God, truth, and reality are merely three words with one ultimate meaning. They signify a state of union with the object of spiritual desire. It may well be that the mysticism which will be experienced through the extensions of scientific research will be the most dynamic spiritual impulse that has ever come to the human race. St. Francis of Assisi found his union with God through humanity, penance, and service. Baron Emanuel Swedenborg attained the same end from his profound studies and higher mathematics. The availability of the divine power through the natural and simple acceptance of the reality of that power is not restricted to a practical level of attainment. That which sustains and strengthens faith by revealing the certainty of God prepares the way for the experience of mystical identity. The child mind, by the circumstance of innocence, is without doubt or reservation. The mature mind, having transformed innocence into integrity through experience, justifies that which the child has accepted. It is during the adolescent period, which lies between that the perception powers are confused by those uncertainties which obscure essential values. The term faith has been badly misunderstood. It is not the unquestioning acceptance of that which is not demonstrable, nor is it a blight upon natural curiosity. We are not less anxious to learn. In fact, thoughtfulness finds a fuller justification. Faith is the conscious and voluntary acceptance of the wisdom, love, and security behind and within the process of creation. It is the recognition of the universal integrity so complete and so inevitable that human doubts are intuitively dissolved. Truth is good, love is law, and life is God. Once the human consciousness has accepted these facts, a sufficient faith is not only possible, but also eminently available. Faith becomes a discipline of the heart, even as philosophy is a discipline of the mind. By the practice of faith, the emotions are refined and their excesses subdued. When faith is strong in the heart, the mind is at peace and the body is without tension. Composure itself is essential to the integration of the human personality. The conflict which burdens those of little faith not only interferes with man's inner life, but also unsettles most of his objective activities. When faith is weak, doubts are strong, And to doubt is to divide, to weaken, and to impoverish. We cannot be secure as individuals if we are without confidence in the security of the divine plan. If nature be without purpose, then all human purposes are meaningless. Faith bestows courage because it sustains the works of courage. It also justifies aspiration by supporting the human hope with the certainty of the divine purpose. It is the mystical conviction that God is present as a power within man. This power is remote and inaccessible as long as the human personality resists its works or denies its reality. Faith opens the heart to God by the discipline of quietism. Those who seek truth are admonished to be still and know. In a wonderful way, faith bestows stillness. This mystery is the perfect work of faith. When we enter a vast cathedral and stand in the presence of sacredness, we are instinctively silent. We wish to accept the atmosphere of the holy place. The spell would be broken if we failed to be reverent. The sanctuary of God in man must likewise be approached with gentleness and peace. We worship most perfectly when we are quietly receptive to the impact of holiness. If then we seek the God who abides in the innermost, we must come with the simple dignity of sufficient faith. To fail in this is to profane the mystery of life, and the source of that mystery. Faith, like love, cannot survive either analysis or definition. We may dissect the body of man, but we cannot in this way discover his spirit. Likewise, if we approach the mystery of God to weigh, analyze, consider, and debate, we find nothing. The divine substance cannot be discovered. It must be experienced. And when it is so known, it can be neither named nor defined. In Christian mysticism, Christ is the revelation of the love of God. It is difficult to decide whether love bestows faith or faith justifies love. Perhaps faith must come first. It is not easy to love that which we do not know or which is remote and majestic. If faith bestows the power to know God in the heart, it is inevitable that we shall love that which we have come to experience as beautiful and good. In the very process of worship, we instinctively bestow our love upon the object of our adoration. Faith, having known the fact of God, instinctively interprets that fact through the emotion of adoration. The word adoration means divine love or affection on the level of the spiritual substance. The simple act of faith opens a new world and a new way of life to the human being. The physical universe is governed by laws that must be observed, and disobedience brings inevitable retribution. The spiritual state of man also has its rules and obligations, but few of us are aware of the strength of these gentler statutes. The Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5:7, is the code of mystic Christianity. Many have said that these commendations cannot be applied in modern society. Minds and bodies may be governed by the codes of Hammurabi and Justinian, but the heart alone understands and accepts the Beatitudes. The kingdom of faith is not of this world, but its domains are vast and its authority greater than we know. The path of faith is not one of sacrifice, but of fulfillment. It is only when there is little faith that we must make those uncomfortable decisions between principles and practices. Various impulses, not all of them meritorious, impelled to the search for God. These impulses are as diverse and contrary as the convictions of the disciples about the ministry of Jesus. Some believe that spiritual achievement will bestow temporal authority, others that it will compensate for weakness of character, and still others that it will make available to them the material objects of their desire. While such ulterior motives are present, true faith is not possible. The heart which is established in righteousness seeks nothing for itself, requires nothing, and demands nothing. When we attain to a sufficient faith, all things that are needed are added. Miracles are wrought not as the result of faith, but by the very fact of faith. In the mystical divinity is revealed the doctrine of divine grace. The ever-available experience of the fact of God transforms the universe of law into a sphere of grace. There is no longer anything that is terrible, ominous, or fearful. There is only divine love, working in mysterious ways to perform its wonders. Man created the God of wrath, which is a shadow without substance, By the experience of faith, man comes to know the God of love, abiding in everlastingness. The mystical experience is an act of becoming, which unfolds towards union with the sovereign good. There is no growth or progress apart from being. We are not enriched by what we have, but by what we are. Many have turned from their religions because institutions have not been able to bring peace or security to the world. Theologians have forgotten that they serve best through the unfoldment of their own spiritual powers and not through the enlargement and glorification of their institutions. Religion has not failed, but the substitution of formal worship in the place of works of private faith can never succeed. Mysticism escapes the illusion of history. It frees the mind from the most natural inclination, which is to approach events from the outside. The mind seeks to possess facts by accumulating them and storing them away for future reference. Having arranged them chronologically in the filing system of memory, it considers itself to be well informed. The heart has no time for such classification. It brings intervals of time and quality by an instinctive appraisal of values. Mysticism in this way accepts history only as a dated record, recording eternal verities. The records of nations are long accounts of hates, fears, hopes, dreams, and intense allegiances. While the manifestations of human instincts may be divided and arranged chronologically, the instincts themselves are not susceptible to such organization. Scriptural writings are important because they restate ever-present emergencies. The heart accepts the lesson but rejects the historical framework. It gathers all doctrines into an eternal now and experiences them as an immediate impact. In this way, the old becomes immanent and can be experienced and thereby known in the spirit rather than the letter. This overcomes the prejudice against ancient writings and the insistent demand for new revelations. A revelation is itself only an interpretation of an enduring fact. Once the fact is known, the interpretations are no longer required. Mysticism is the direct attainment of the end rather than an intellectual reflection upon the means. We cannot plan growth as we can chart some physical project. Where nature asserts her procedures, we have learned to accept them and to adjust to the situation which they cause. Spiritual unfoldment is also a growth according to the laws of the divine world. This enlargement of truth within ourselves is not the result of a demand or an insistence. It is the divine will accomplishing its own purpose. It would not occur to us that we have the right or the power to direct the growth of a flower or the physical development of another human being. We accept the unfoldment of these lives because we are ever in the presence of the process. The mysticism in our hearts increases in its own way. It is our privilege to accommodate ourselves to the spiritual plan of which we are a part. Once faith has revealed the reality of our divine nature, we are inspired to serve the requirements of this nature. Like good guardians, we can protect the soul flower, but we can never dictate its unfoldment. The German mystic Jacob Boehme wrote that the seed of Christ had been placed in every human heart. It was the privilege of man to guard this seed and to nourish it so that it could grow. The food of the soul is love, faith, and beauty. And when this nutrition is properly provided, the soul enlarges and extends itself until it becomes a great tree and bears its fruit. And this fruit is for the healing of the nations, like a palm tree growing in some desert place. It gives shade and rest and even food to the lonely traveler. It is the tree of Christ growing from the human heart that brings peace to the world and contentment to the individual. The gentle, thoughtful, and devout meditation upon this wonderful and beautiful symbol enriches consciousness and causes the mood of mysticism. The mystic walks in ways of beauty because he believes in the ministry of beauty. He knows within himself that beauty bears witness to the divine love and the divine wisdom. He needs no further evidence than that which is available to all through the simple instinct of appreciation. Christian mysticism was certainly inspired by the sect of the Essenes, a small community of devout men and women which flourished in Palestine in the opening centuries of the Christian era. The Essenes venerated truth by the simple act of living according to its laws. They dwelt together in socialized communities, sharing their goods in common and devoting their lives to the service of all in need. They recognize no formal worship except personal prayer and collective industry. The Essenes proved in their day, and other mystics have demonstrated the same fact in later generations, that the love of God does not interfere with social usefulness. The mystic is not one forever absorbed in the contemplation of eternal verities. His inner experience impels him, inevitably, to the practice of ideals which possess him. That which he experiences in private he applies publicly. He may be misunderstood and even persecuted, but if he is truly strengthened by God, his faith sustains him. It is the intellect which is content to live in a world of thoughts. The heart cannot be so constrained, but escapes through good works into a larger sphere of usefulness. The 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians is one of the most beautiful parts of the New Testament, and powerfully substantiates the mystical content in the Christian communion. Paul, the apostle, addresses the church of God at Corinthia, exhorting the congregation to be united in faith, saying to them, "Know ye not that ye are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwelleth in you?" Paul then devoted much consideration to the mystery of charity. Before we consider his text, we must free our minds from the peculiar limitations which the word now implies. The Greek original is agape. Our English word for charity is from the Latin caritas, meaning dearness or love. From charis, dear, costly, or loved. At the time of the translation authorized by King James, and even earlier, charity literally meant the virtue or act of loving God, with a devotion transcending affection for creatures, and of loving our fellow men likewise for the sake of God. It also implied the substance of love unfolded to its perfection and, hence, divine nature itself or God. Charity in the sense of generosity to the poor, or the afflicted, or the support of benevolent institutions, or public provision for the underprivileged, is to be understood only as an expression of, or an act implied by, internal experience of the mystery of love. Paul, therefore, was not primarily teaching charity as goodwill to the poor, but as the love of God manifested through the natural inclination to serve those who are in need. In mysticism, we must further examine the substance of love and discover within it the secret of all worship and the perfect law of all human relationship. The life way of the mystic Christian is inspired and directed by a quality of personal realization, by which the understanding is strengthened in the resolution to practice the presence of divine love in daily works. The meaning of Paul is clearer to us if we use the word charity that now most clearly states the essence of charity. He writes, "Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, and have not love, I have become sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy, and understand all mystery, and have all knowledge, and though I have all faith, so that I could remove mountains and have not love, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, and have not love, it profiteth me nothing. Love suffereth long and is kind. Love envieth not. Love vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up, do not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil, beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things." Paul clarified the meaning of charity in his own words, for he reminded the Corinthians that bestowing all earthly goods to feed the poor was not a proof of love, but profited nothing without the spirit of love. All Christian mystics have been noteworthy for the humility and gentleness of their lives. In most instances, this was not an attitude cultivated in the hope of attaining grace. It was the simple act of devotion resulting from the internal acceptance through faith of a conviction about truth. If humility is assumed, if patience is cultivated to impress others, there is no support from within the self. Under such conditions, the practice of these artificial virtues ends in suffering, frustration, and disillusionment. There is no reward from the world, or at least there is no certainty of such reward. For the practice of these mystical virtues, The source of security is completely internal and survives because it bestows all and requires nothing, not even appreciation. It requires clearer vision than is available to those who see through a glass darkly, to know that to give is finally to possess all. Today, each is seeking security, peace, happiness, and health. To attain these most desirable ends, numerous means have been devised. Most of these have failed because they have been motivated by selfishness. The dimensions of failure are apparent, but the lesson has not been learned. There is still an abiding hope that we can build a better world by protecting ourselves and preserving our own opinions. The mystic will sometimes be recognized as the most practical of mortals because he has renounced the policy of private gain at public expense. He is further relieved of pressure because the spiritual alchemy taking place within his own consciousness has transmuted material ambitions into spiritual aspirations. Ambition impels one to dominate and to possess on the material plane. Aspiration inspires one towards a sharing in truth by the act of becoming like truth. The peoples of the Eastern countries have long appreciated the powers of the soul. They have created systems of soul culture, like those which the Greeks called disciplines. The first of these disciplines was intended to strengthen and enlighten the human standard of values. It has been said that where man's treasure is, there also will be his heart. When we really desire the gifts of the Spirit, as we now crave the satisfactions of the flesh, we will naturally and simply sacrifice the lesser for the greater. Mysticism has been called a path of pain, not because its way is one of suffering, but because most are brought to a recognition of realities by temporal or physical misfortunes. We seek only that which we need, and we seldom realize our internal needs until our external estate is threatened. In the human experience, suffering nearly always resolves itself into a question. We wonder why our policies have failed, and how we can remedy the condition. Thus, uncertainty inspires a larger effort to discover the rules governing human activity. Insecurity impels the developments in religion, philosophy, and science. We have discovered much and become apperceptionally aware of still more. Yet, with all our seeking, we have not achieved either peace or security. The quest must continue, and the examples of those most wonderfully enlightened remind us that not only the mystical experience can make available the spiritual resources of mankind, we can conquer the furthermost and remain creatures alone and afraid. But when we allow our hearts and minds to be conquered by the innermost, the longer journey comes to its end. Each human being is distinctly and inevitably a person. By this virtue, each has his own dreams and aspirations and a group of faculties and powers within his own composition suitable to advance his cause. Mysticism does not require that we depart from the familiar or attempt a way of life that is strange or distant. We do not grow by assuming a code that is contrary to our inclinations. Rather, we unfold by and through that which is familiar. The mystical experience is not associated with one profession, art, or craft. There is no such royal road to God. All constructive human purposes have their mystical overtones. And as we approach the perfection of our work, whatever it may be, we become aware of its spiritual content. All labor, whether it be of the mind, the heart, or the hand, shares in the quality of service. Motive becomes the magical agent. The refinement of our own motives leads inevitably to the realization of the eternal mystery. When the motive is profit, we labor in darkness. But when the motive is the simple love of God and man, we work in the light and towards the light. It is then and only then that work satisfies the soul. Mysticism is not the end of labor, but the beginning of truly meaningful and satisfying endeavor. The mystic does not renounce knowledge. He does not deny the wonderful accomplishments in all fields of learning. To him, all these achievements become better roads and paths, because his understanding is deeper. His appreciation is more enlightened. Thus we say that mysticism is not a science or an art, but an ensoulment of sciences and art. It ends by conscious consideration of all things known and all things knowable, to the service of the great cause, which is the source of the known and the unknown. Do not, therefore, in the search for truth, depart from your own world with its joys and sorrows. As you grow, that which is not your own will depart from you. Neglect no responsibility. Reject no work that comes to your hand, but fulfill all things, and all that is needed will be fulfilled in you. Mysticism is wonderfully suited to the problems of each generation, no matter how simple or how complicated living may be. The power of the heart is always available and sufficient. Times may change, states may rise and fall, religions may be reformed or neglected, prosperity or adversity may dominate society, but faith is unchangeable. It accepts equally the appearances of good and bad, and cannot be corrupted by external emergencies. Love, hope, and faith are eternal and are part of that timelessness which pervades all time by spiritual dimension. It is for this reason that mysticism has flourished among the members of every belief that has come to the world. The interpretations of religion are many and diversified, but the mysticism is always the same. It is the heart fulfilling its own requirements, nourished and sustained by the presence of God. During the last several years, there has been a rapid increase of popular interest in retreating movements. Many denominations, which have not hitherto encouraged retreats, have established houses devoted to religious seclusion. Persons from many walks of life have testified to the benefits derived from brief periods of voluntary retirement from the pressures of society. This in itself reveals the urgent need for mystical content in the compound of the human personality. It explains the existence of monastic orders and why they have survived the innumerable changes which have affected the outer form of society. To the mystic, religious houses are symbolical of that internal existence available to those who would draw from a state of objectivity. Even as the external is perpetually agitated, the internal part of life is nearer to that tranquility, which is the consideration of God. As the small child, frightened or injured, instinctively hastens to its parents for protection and comfort, the mature person in the state of emergency seeks the consolation of his faith. God becomes the understanding father-mother, which we try to find by the simple processes of visualization and acceptance. The divine presence is available by the act of voluntary acknowledgement. We believe, and by the direct action of belief, we perform a personal retreat towards the participation in the condition of godliness. The Christian mystic accepts as a fact that by entering into his quietude, he will come into the substance of the divine presence. This is the act of faith, and the burden which has impelled the action is unfolded through the mystery of prayer. This is the meaning of the words of Jesus when he admonished his followers to enter into the dark closet and pray to their Father in secret. The mystical mood is one of prayerfulness, rather than a formal ritual of prayer. It is not conceivable to the human heart that the eternal parent must be addressed as though it were a person apart. Faith itself accepts the omniscience of God and approaches with the full expectation of being understood. In mysticism, to seek is to find, and to knock is to have the door opened. All that is required is internal certainty about the reality of things unseen. When faith is deep and sufficient and love is pure and unselfish, all things are possible, so strengthened by simple convictions. The mystic experiences within himself the sacrament of the Eucharist. He is the living chalice, and in his own heart the water of penitence is miraculously transformed into the wine of ecstasy. It is evident that mysticism leads to the most intimate spiritual experience possible to the human being. The practice of the presence is fulfilled in the fact of the presence. As long as religions are the instruments of the heart doctrine, they will be custodians of the mystical tradition. When we wish to share that which is most real or most sacred with another person, we have a heart-to-heart talk with him. The very term implies that we choose a meeting place remote from superficial or artificial concerns. In the practice of our religion, especially under great stress, we seek a relationship with God, which is heart-to-heart. Our need is not satisfied by the God of battles or the Lord of hosts. nor do we find contentment in the splendor and majesty or power of the divine nature. We long for the simple assurance of God's love, which, ever more than God's wisdom, surpasses understanding. The life and teaching of Jesus of Nazareth, as recorded in the Gospels, has appealed for centuries to those of devout heart. The simplicity of the basic story, the strangely quiet and gentle atmosphere which pervades the account, and the humble background of the disciples and followers of the Nazarene have combined to convey a wonderful impression of spiritual integrity. The first Christian communities survived by faith alone, and there is no intimation that philosophical interpretations were involved or that the need of them was felt. It was only after the church attained a large sphere of temporal authority that scholarship was introduced. Even during the scholastic period, intellectuals were more a cause of concern than of satisfaction. As Christianity spread into classes accustomed to a more philosophical type of spiritual nutrition, the mystical overtones were compromised in the effort to justify and approve on planes of logic and reason. The simple dignity of honest convictions gave place to argument and debate. Faith, diluted by doubt, no longer guided the religious impulse. While men cast lots for the raiment, the garment itself was destroyed. In a strange way, Christian philosophy destroyed Christian mysticism, and in doing so impoverished the world. Philosophy leads inevitably to interpretation, explanation, or the substitution of ideas. Sectarianism, which is, indeed, a thorn in the flesh, is justified and sustained only by interpretation. It is the conviction of the mystic that the life and teaching of Jesus should not be explained. They must be accepted as an experience of consciousness. The moment we examine and analyze the fabric of love, it vanishes, and the same is true of faith. The simple impact of a holy example and the direct appeal of a kindly and gentle teaching penetrate to depths not to be reached by proof or evidence. The interreligious effect of Christianity clearly reveals this fact. The informed members of all non-Christian religious systems have frequently expressed, both as individuals and through their leaders, their profound respect and admiration for the life and teachings of Jesus. Many have accepted him on the level of their own saints and inspired leaders. It is the mass of Christian theology accumulated through the uncertain means of interpretation and explanation which has offended, or at least disturbed, the devout non-Christian and Christian alike. If men are to meet in fellowship and dedicate their common efforts in good works, it will not be because of the industry of conflicting creeds. As surely as the mind divides, so surely the heart unites. Only in the mystical experience of faith can we accomplish the dynamic fact of spiritual cooperation. We must learn, and by now all necessary evidence is available. The human heart is the common denominator of all convictions, held devoutly to be true. All mystics practice one quality of faith, regardless of the names or terms by which it is described. This quality of faith is the hope of the world. Most persons must achieve this quality in the silence of their own hearts. But once they have known it, they are united as one person in the love of God, and dedicated as one person in the service of good. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.